Hey, Truth Seekers. This is Road to Disclosure. I'm your host, David. Wanted to do a quick episode, if I can get it under 15 minutes or so, on the crisis in Ukraine that everyone is suspecting it might blow up into some kind of world war. Trying to give my perspective, some of the sources that I source to, and just give you an understanding of how I'm seeing the whole scenario unfold. Because a lot of people are telling me that they're worried about it. And most people, I don't even think, really see the big picture, how this is the culmination of really of a world war between the cabal and the alliance. So good versus bad, or I should say the cabal being bad. So I wanted to start off with one of my sources that I go and get geopolitical news from is, I'll show you guys the, is Stillness in the Storm. They've been around for at least a decade, and they provide right now a lot of geopolitical analysis, but also different variety of articles. So if you guys want to actually go here to get your geopolitical news, this is a good site. It used to actually do a lot of focus on more esoteric type news, but it's progressed to more towards geopolitical news site. So yeah, you guys can go here. I go here on occasion. I probably have at least a dozen sites that I go to on a daily basis, and this is just one of them. So kind of going to one of their articles that they published, I believe, a day or so ago. This was Vladimir Putin's speech that he gave on the 23rd, I believe, before he decided to have his Russian troops, move into the Ukraine. So just kind of going and looking at some of the speech that Putin gave and why he decided to move into the Ukraine, because a lot of people are speculating on what those reasons are, and you certainly are going to hear information from mainstream media. I would not trust mainstream media myself, mainly because they are known liars, even government officials. But everyone needs to discern for themselves. So, obviously, coming from the source directly from Putin, this is some of the things that he said. He's one of the reasons they made push into the Ukraine is because of the push by the eastward expansion by NATO. That's the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which was moving military infrastructure and assets closer and closer to the Russian border. So clearly, if this happened to any other country, particularly let's say the United States, you would see some kind of reaction, even sooner than Russia did in terms of protecting its border. Particularly with the United States, you'd see if military assets lined up on the Mexican or Canadian border for whatever reasons, you'd have an immediate push back in whatever way that was going to happen. Military pushback, I mean. So that's clearly what Putin is doing in this scenario. He references over the past 30 years, Russia's been patiently trying to come to an agreement with the leading NATO countries regarding the principles of equal and indivisible security in Europe. So that North Atlantic alliance continues to expand despite their protests and concerns. Its military machine is moving, and as I said, is approaching our very border. So at least that gives you an understanding from the horse's mouth from Putin as to why why he made the push to go into the Ukraine. I don't look at it as an invasion, and there's reasons for that. If you actually go to Simon Parks's website, there's an article on there, because I didn't actually bring that article up, as to whether or not the Ukraine is recognized under international law, if it's recognized, its borders are recognized as sovereign borders. So that's called into question. So I would definitely maybe look into that yourselves, whether or not under certain treaties, I think they reference the CIS treaty, which is kind of an Eastern European treaty, as well as the Budapest Memorandum. After the USSR fell in 1991, December of 1991, I don't believe Ukraine had officially recognized, or even had the United Nations officially recognize their borders. So in essence, this is one of the reasons you have Russian separatists within the Ukraine, that want to essentially secede to Russia. So obviously that would be the Crimea area and other, I think, Donetsk. So, and I'll show a map of that area. But one of the other things I want to show, I actually posted this on Instagram. This is actually showing Putin speak and some of his talking points. And this is coming from RT News, which is actually a Russian state-sponsored news site. But he goes into some of the things that he speaks about as special military operation into Donbass, recognizing that Ukraine, particularly out of the last revolution that occurred in 2014, that was supported by the United States. If you remember that specific revolution, there was essentially neo-Nazis that took over within the government. Poroshenko was essentially brought in as the president of that time. I'm actually going to show some information on that, but you can see he clearly Putin recognizes this as well. He recognizes the neo-Nazi faction within the Ukraine. So he's telling the Ukrainian people that they took an oath of allegiance, essentially not to support the neo-Nazis. So he's asking the Ukrainian forces to lay down their arms, and he's actually willing to allow them to go back to their homes in peace, not by attacking them. And if you've viewed some of the information over the media, whether it's true or not, you can actually see that some of the military assets in the Ukraine that are Russian military assets from the Ukraine, particularly this one island, I can't recall what it was, but was allowing these soldiers essentially lay down their arms, and obviously they won't be harmed. You guys can discern for yourselves whether or not you believe that's the case or not. But so that's a really good video from Putin himself. This is one of the other people that I really trust as a source is Ben Swan from Truth in Media. So I'm just going to real quick listen to one of the things he brought about a day or so ago. So here you go.
You've probably heard by now that Vladimir Putin wants to retake all of Ukraine and other former Soviet countries, including NATO countries, and that nothing will stop him at this point. But is that true? Turns out that what Putin is asking for are really just two demands from Ukraine in order for his military forces to leave the country immediately. And those two demands, well, they're pretty simple. Number one, he's asking that Ukraine remain neutral, that it become a neutral country similar to Switzerland, not a member of NATO. And number two, that Ukraine remove all of its foreign weapons provided by governments from around the world, including the United States. Now, when you hear that, you might say, well, that's unfair, because if that happens, who will protect Ukraine? Guess what? No one's protecting Ukraine now. With all those foreign weapons that are there at this point that the United States has provided to the cost of billions of dollars to U.S. taxpayers, guess what? It only took a few hours for the Russians to actually overrun the entire country and to close in on the capital city of Kiev. What's most interesting about this, that the media is probably not telling you, is that Russia is not even demanding that the current president of Ukraine step down, not even demanding that they replace him in the government, not demanding that they take over the government or they install their own puppets. The existing U.S.-backed president of Ukraine is allowed to stay so long as Ukraine is neutral and so long as the weapons from other countries are removed. Doesn't exactly sound like a plan for world domination. It does sound like a plan to stop NATO's push against Russia.
All right, so that was a really good report by Ben. So going back to the Ukrainian revolution from 2014, if you guys look on DuckDuckGo, look up that, you can actually see, so it was called the Revolution of Dignity, or Euromaidan Revolution. And if you guys recall, there was like some violent extremists that were going around and shooting a bunch of people, protesters themselves, and even police. That was in the capital of Kiev. So you guys can kind of go into this, but the elected president was overthrown, Viktor Yanukovych. And then you had the neo-Nazi Poroshenko come in. And that was actually manifested by the United States, I would say by the deep state. I think it was under Victoria Nuland, who was a ambassador, I want to say the ambassador to Ukraine. So the United States was involved in that coup, that power coup, which is associated with the revolution. So So clearly, United States, and one of the things that's important to understand is Ukraine is not a NATO country. So in that scenario, if someone like Russia were to declare war on Ukraine, you would not have the NATO countries usually have like a defense treaty. They're not allowed to actually intervene if they're not a NATO country. Like an example would be like Turkey. Turkey's a NATO country. If someone were to attack the Ukraine, Turkey actually has to make the decision of whether or not they're going to support Russia, who they're an ally with, or if they were going to support NATO. If, let's say, if the Ukraine was a NATO country, which it's not. So these are all important facts. That's why I'm just referencing them. One of the things that people need to really kind of go back and understand in terms of who's in charge of the Ukraine, when I talk about neo-Nazis, this is obviously deep state factions. There's obviously a variety of factions at play here. Cabal, I'm going to call it cabal from now on because that's the term I use, cabal factions. I don't know if YouTube's going to dock me on this or not, but cabal factions. This goes back, the control goes back all the way, at least in Ukraine, goes back, present day Ukraine, goes back all the way to like 1,000 years ago, roughly. So between the 9th century and the 12th century, roughly, you had the group of people that controlled that area were called the Khazarians. You can actually go back and look at. This is an article from archived article from Veterans Today. I can't actually share this on certain social media sites, but you guys can look up the history of the incredibly evil Khazarian mafia. So back in the day when they were controlling the present day, the area that's present day Ukraine and certain other areas in Eastern Europe, these people were surrounded at one point. I think in the 13th century it was. Surrounded by the countries and essentially were at war with these countries, including Russia at the time, because of their evil ways. They were essentially given an ultimatum that if they didn't surrender and convert to one of the three monotheistic religions at the time, so you have Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they didn't convert, that they would obviously be destroyed. So they did convert mostly to Judaism. There was probably some that converted, but this was a fake conversion. So obviously, if there's people that we would consider in the cabal practice a Luciferian ideology, or some people would say a satanic ideology. So this would be they pretend to be of a certain religious background. So they pretend to be Christians or Jews or Muslims, just as a guise, as a cover for their obviously evil ways. So I'll post this on, you guys can read it. It's a very long article, at least I believe it was, and it just gives you some insight into what took place in that area. This is important only insofar as the fact that the cabal is losing ground, and Ukraine being one of their strongholds. They had strongholds. Obviously, they controlled the Vatican, they controlled Antarctica, they controlled a variety of places across the globe. All of those places are being taken out. They've already been taken out. So you could say Ukraine is actually one of the last strongholds. So when we're talking about like global war, and I've mentioned this, I think, on posts before, we're already in a world war. It's just been behind the scenes. It's been like an undercover war almost, or an underground war. Now that it's more publicized and overt because of the Ukrainian situation, now it's recognized as kind of like potential for a world war. But we're already in this. It's essentially good versus evil right now. So I just want to kind of showcase the history of that, because obviously the cabal is one of their major factions. The Khazarians are embedded within Ukraine because they consider it kind of like their homeland, or it's just a stronghold in that sense. All right, one of the people that I do follow on YouTube is Monkeyworks, and I just wanted to kind of showcase his analysis. There's a bunch of people that have done analysis over this that are worth looking into. One would be the X22 report, Dave. His analysis, I believe it was on the 25th, is one of the better analysis of that I've seen. Monkeyworks just kind of goes, he's a good source to actually look at, because he looks at all of the military assets, particularly the aircrafts that are usually flying over any part of the world, and he focuses on this, obviously over the Ukraine and the Black Sea, and he gives his input. Not all of it is correct in my opinion, but it's worth noting what he actually has to say. And so you definitely want to read this if you go to his, this is from earlier today, one of his posts. And he got his own show where he showcases a lot of this. You guys can look. The high-risk areas, this is the Black Sea. You have Crimea right here, and then Ukraine there. He has some other photos. I think that's pretty much it. So he recognizes like no-fly zones. This is again the Black Sea. This is Turkey, and these are the Eastern Europe, NATO controlled. So this is where a lot of the assets, military assets, would be lined up near borders of Russia. Excuse me. A lot of people are scared that this might evolve into some kind of nuclear war. I don't foresee that happening. I'm going to speak about that at the very end of this. But a lot of people are fearful of that. I'm trying to see what some of the stuff he said in terms of naval assets, several countries to the Black Sea, sanctions against Putin, and I believe their finance minister, which are not going to do anything. Everyone's expecting cyber attacks. Cyber attacks have already occurred, particularly even in the United States. If you go look at, this is my Telegram account, if you go and look at General McInerney, he's not one of my favorites, but some of his posts are really insightful in some degree. So he goes into how like China is taking advantage of this weakness purportedly by the United States not acting the way we normally would under obviously President Brandon. So he says Taiwan defense minister says 9 Chinese military aircraft entered its air defenses. So this potentially has the effect that it would start a world war. Again, we're already in that world war. If people don't actually perceive that, I don't know where they're getting their news from. It's probably mainstream media, mockingbird media, what I call it. So at this point, like China potentially is going to take Taiwan, and the United States has always been against that, allowing Taiwan to be a sovereign country. NATO's not acting on that. This has to do with everything obviously going on in the world, including what's going on in the Ukraine. He goes into the Chernobyl power plant. It's been captured by Russians. That's good because we don't obviously want the cabal having. So one of the things I'm going to go into next, this has to do with what is one of the reasons that the Russian military was brought in to take out certain areas, certain military bases, cabal bases, strongholds, probably some even DUMBs, deep underground military bases. But predominantly it's like weapons factories, it's biolabs, and the mainstream media would have you believe that that's not the case. You guys can discern for yourselves, but they are clearly taking these bases out. Because the cabal is essentially not on their last legs, but they're close to it. So they're desperate. You can see, if you're aware, you can see the desperation and how they're behaving, particularly with what was going on in Canada. So obviously there's troops being sent, U.S. troops sent to Germany. Some people are saying this is like another, potential setup for another false flag. Just want to see if there's anything. He's got a bunch. You guys can look if you guys have Telegram. They show footage. They show footage of what's going on in the Ukraine. You still want to be mindful. They have the potential. The cabal has the potential. They still control media, and they can this wag the dog scenario that I've mentioned. They can manipulate media to make it look like there's explosions and all sorts of things. I mean, almost like a movie. They can make it look like a real movie with their technology and CGI and whatnot. And a variety of people don't know what Project Bluebeam is. They can actually have holographic technology in the sky that makes it look like a battle's going on or even an alien invasion. I'm not going to go into that tonight, but so and when you're discerning who's telling the truth or not, and everyone should do that for themselves. But you look at if mainstream media is telling you one thing, if the U.S. government's telling you the same, but other governments are saying something else, or other people that we would acknowledge as deep state operatives or minions. Clearly, you have Alexander Soros, who's George Soros' son, is siding with Ukraine. That should tell you something. That should tell you something doesn't smell right. Let's look at who's really controlling Ukraine. And a lot of people are deceived, even people within Ukraine, even people within Russia, even the people in the United States. Everybody's going to be potentially deceived by propaganda. No one's necessarily immune to every psyop, psychological operation in that regards. But in this sense, you can see different things occurring. He has decent insights. Oh, this was interesting too. If you guys see this glitch in the matrix with President Brandon there, with his hand on different spots. So we know that's, I'm not even going to go into that right now. Let's see. So we know, he was talking about cyber attacks. Cyber attacks are the new warfare, the preferred warfare. whether it's from China, Russia, the United States, shutting down, let's say, different companies or different power grids. That's how you actually affect nations and make them suffer. Shutting down anything to do with logistics and supply chain. So clearly, if we're going to have a world war, that's if it becomes more overt, that's what's going to happen. So if anything, it's not a nuclear threat you have to worry about. It's a cyber attack on, let's say, a power grid. And I don't, at this point, because I think the alliance is actually in control, I don't see that as a major threat. But you guys can see some of these things that General McInerney posted. Some of them are relevant, some of them not so much. All right, so we're going to go back to, all right, so you have that. Wanted to just kind of go into some of the maps of the Ukraine so people can actually see, and overlays of where Russia has actually gone in and with their militaries or with their military, with their troops. And there's definitely more special forces being used that you won't necessarily hear about. Pinpoint strikes, I should say, rather than just strikes from artillery and ships, the Navy. But all right, so this kind of just, you can see a map there. One of the things people say, the biolabs are not real. So I had posted on this before. You can see back in 2021, April of 2021, there was reports by mainstream news that the Putin's advisor, his chief security advisor, had mentioned that there was good reason to believe the United States was developing biological weapons along the Russia-China borders. That kind of makes sense if you think about it. That obviously would be a strategy, let's say, the United States would utilize in other westernized countries. And I'm not saying that's a good strategy. I'm just saying clearly that would be something they'd be doing. They were acknowledging this back in 2021 in April in mainstream. So it gives you an idea that, okay, they're covering this for a reason. Now they're reversing the position and saying, no, it's not happening in Ukraine. That's BS. You can actually see some of the biolabs. This is just one. You guys can look up one map I found. And so you can see the biolabs that are purportedly in Ukraine. Obviously one near Kiev. And this is where Chernobyl is, the very top of the Ukraine, where the Russian troops essentially took over the nuclear facility there. So overlaying this with strike points of where Russia went in, if these are real U.S. military biolabs, some of the, and I think there was one on the western border here. The eastern border here. Yeah, you can see there's a striking resemblance to the. I think I put another one here. Yeah, so here's another map. You can kind of see. This is the biolabs, purported biolabs. I don't have direct proof that these biolabs exist, but this is in these areas. But this is where I would assume they are. I doubt we'll ever actually have that fully confirmed. But and this just gives you like an overall view of the area, which I thought, again, Turkey being on the southern border, and again, Turkey's important because if they enter this battlefield themselves, if they're going to support Russia because they're an ally of Russia, but they are a NATO country, so they might side with the NATO countries, which are obviously the United States and Europe are associated with. All right, so going into the potential threats. Lastly, because I want to keep this short, I don't know how long it is, but the potential threats, nuclear threats, I don't believe that's going to happen. I think it might be something that's pushed as like a scare tactic. And if we go back to a source that I've mentioned before, I think a year ago, the 17th letter of the alphabet, some of his posts, their posts, talk about a necessary scare event. Potentially having the public view this as a world war. In the United States, we would go to DEFCON 1. DEFCON means defense condition. So in peace, we're at DEFCON 5. In war, we're at DEFCON 1. So that in and of itself, if we were potentially going to a world war with countries clearly having the nuclear arsenals that they purportedly have, people would foresee that as like a threat of nuclear war. Whether that would even happen, and it would not happen. I'm 110% sure it would not. But this scare event, to elicit some kind of response from the public, would would be potentially necessary, according to military intelligence, which is, again, the 17th letter of the alphabet, which I'm not allowed to say on YouTube. All right, so you guys can look up this stuff yourself, but this is, depending on the website you go to, and you can search in the field. I just searched the term scare, and you can see some of this stuff. There was something else I wanted to actually go over in this, but I can't remember what it was. But you guys can, you can see, not everything will be clean. We're at a war. We're in a war, world war already, and we have been for years. Good versus evil. And unfortunately, in a war, there are civilian casualties. Clearly, the good side, the alliance, does not want to have those casualties. But in some cases, and if you look at positions where the cabal in the Ukraine, they've positioned some of their assets in civilian locations. So clearly you'd have pinpoint strikes by special forces go in, so it minimizes the collateral damage of civilians. And that's not always preventable. I'm not saying, clearly the bad guy in this is going to be painted, is going to be Russia for doing any of these kinds of attacks, rather than whoever's considered the good guys in mainstream media's eyes, which would obviously be the Ukraine. Everyone needs to kind of put all that in perspective. All right, so one of the reasons I do not believe nuclear wars is going to occur is because of the benevolent ETs. This is easiest way I can talk about it is we are being watched over. There's no way by benevolent advanced forces, people would call them the Galactic Federation, among other names. Whether you believe in ETs or not that are here, and that's like a whole other discussion, but there's precedent for it. If you guys go and even if you just look some of this stuff up, this is stuff I found out 10 years ago, particularly through the show Ancient Aliens, 10 or 12 years ago when it was first coming on. But you can go, and actually this disclosure movement, when Dr. Stephen Greer produced his disclosure project, May of 2001, and he had whistleblowers come out and speak about some of these incidences where you'd have UFOs that shut down nuclear missile silos. This is predominantly in Montana. This was in the 1960s, 1970s, and it's happened since then as well. So benevolent ETs essentially will not allow nuclear war to occur. There might be the possibility of one nuclear bomb to go off, and these days you have fifth and sixth generational nukes, so it's very little, more explosion potentially, but less radiation. People would use 9/11 as an example. The buildings obviously had nanothermite and other ingredients that were potentially considered nuclear suitcase bomb. So they have the ability to create smaller nuclear bombs that wouldn't necessarily have the impact of radiation. So, but these nuclear silos back in the 1960s, 1970s, you guys can actually look some of this stuff up. If you go to this one article on history.com, throughout our history, since the 1940s, you've obviously had UFO sightings near these nuclear facilities. We're just going to go quickly all the way down almost to the point where they talk about in the 1960s, 1970s, repeated UFO sightings emerged at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, and you had Air Force Captain Robert Salas said several of those missiles became inoperative at the same time. And you guys can look into this, but this is just one example. There's many out there. But my point being, you're going to have, if there was going to be a nuclear war threat, and there's actually even worse weapons out there, particularly space-based weapons, like one would be the rods of God, where you have something fall from space, like a metallic rod made of tungsten, potentially falls at such a velocity it can actually destroy underground facilities very easily. But so there's weapons that could be used, and I actually think it's possible that in terms of promoting ET disclosure, we might see some of these space-based weapons used in whatever war occurs, overt war, because there's already been under the covert war, world war that's been going on. We've already seen directed energy weapons and other things being utilized under the auspices of conventional weaponry. So I think it might become more apparent that someone maybe like Russia has, the alliances that exist in the alliance are global. So nation states, the way we perceive them now, it's a bit, anybody that claims that like the United States is all good or Russia's all bad, that clearly is not the case, because there's loyalties associated with like certain alliances that exist beyond the idea of like a nation state. That's hard to maybe prove, but from my perspective, it is the case. So that's pretty much, I just wanted to kind of go into some of that and give people some perspective that they might not already have been privy to. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment in the chat section of Alex. I'll put this on YouTube. I'll put this on Instagram and Facebook. So hope that gave some decent perspective that people might not have been privy to before. Thanks for watching, everyone.